Recording. Yeah, we're on. Okay, so if you remember what we talked about last time, we analyzed these two experiments, right? One by Scott, very, very important, and one by Overath, also quite familiar, right? Do you remember, can anyone remind me what were the main results of these experiments? Like, you know, what was the main big take-home message? Okay. Yeah.
I think if I may, for Overath, they found that the brain first, when they played the scrambled speech, that the brain first processed what it heard on an acoustic level and then on a speech level, right?
Exactly. And there was an area, right, which was selectively active for the speech, for the temporal properties of speech, right? And that area it was defined functionally, right, within the subjects, and it was the superior temporal sulcus, right, bilaterally. And that area also kind of popped up in the Scott experiment, if you remember, right? Yes, there you go. This one, right? So this is our nice temporal lobe, right? This is the superior gyrus, middle gyrus, inferior gyrus, and between the superior gyrus and the middle gyrus, you have the sulcus, right? Gyrus, sulcus, gyrus, sulcus. So Scott found that when people were processing what he called the intelligibility contrast, so when they could actually recognize words compared to the control, right? You'd have the activation of this area here. When people process the phonetic contrast, so where you could not understand words, but still you could kind of understand some phonemes, some phones actually, included in the sentence, then you would have the activation of this area, suggesting that this area does some more low-level speech processing, and this area has some relation with lexical access, right? Now, I would like to show you the original stimuli that Scott used. So this was Scott's speech. Yeah.
They're buying some bread.
Can you listen to it? Okay. What does it say?
They're buying some bread.
Yeah. Can you understand the sentence?
Yeah, they're buying some bread.
Good. Now, the first thing that they did, right, was to do the noise vocoding, which is what I kind of showed you, right? Can you still recognize the sentence? A little
Yeah.
bit, right? And now you can apply another processing to this sound, another transformation. So you rotate the frequencies and you get this stuff, which is less intelligible, right? You cannot really understand the sentence. So their contrast, if I'm not wrong, was the intelligible condition. Oh, sorry, I haven't showed you this. Right? This is the noise vocal. No, sorry. Forget about that. This is the rotated speech. It preserves some phonetic features like fricatives, voice and voice, and the intonation. You can hear the intonation, right? But you cannot understand the sentences. So in order to investigate the intelligible condition, they would contrast this with the rotated noise vocoded speech, which was this one, right? So you keep the envelope of the no, wait. Yes, was this one. So you keep the envelope of the amplitude of the signal, right? And here you hear some intonation and some vowels, some phonetic features. Here you don't, just noise, okay? And by comparing this to this, as a result, you got the phonetic contrast, the activation of your superior part of the superior temporal gyrus. Instead, the intelligible condition was comparing the real speech.
They're buying some bread.
With the noise vocoded speech, which is a harsh whisper but comprehensible after training, which is this. Okay? So you take away from the normal speech. No. Yes, yes, sorry. Yes, yes, yes. So you take away from the normal speech this sort of the information about the amplitude, the information about certain articulation, certain phonological features. You don't have the pitch, so the pitch and the intonation should remain in your final signal, basically, right? And also the lexical access should not be so important because you have some lexical access also in your control, but a little bit of that might pop out. And as a result, you get the activation of this other area here, which is inferior to the STG, okay? Now this area here is exactly the same area that popped out with override. So if you remember, the idea of override was like to scramble pieces of sound, right? So this was your sentence. You would cut it into pieces of different length, and then you would scramble these pieces. And you would get this, basically. Or in German.
Als Homo-Duplex Koordinatensystem eingezeichnet. Übrigens Klassifikatorisch aufgegliederte Standarde dagegen als Homo-Duplex.
Can you understand anything of this? Right. But even I could tell that this is German, right? So I think this is like half a second or 1 second scrambled. So you can kind of figure out that there are words. You can kind of access the phonological representation of words, but meaningless even for you that you're a speaker of German. Good. Now compare exactly the same speech with a segment of sounds much, much shorter. I think these are like 50 milliseconds. To me, they sound exactly the same. This is how German sounds to me. But of course, you can recognize words much, much more difficult, right? You can still kind of figure out that this is some sort of speech, but it's much less intelligible. Now, if you remember, he applied the same transformation. So he had the noise vocoding. Completely unintelligible. And the noise vocoding short, with shorter segments. And I think they're actually the other way around, right? This is longer segments. I understood Mention. So see, again the same contrast. Here you get the pitch away, you get the intonation away, but you still kind of understand certain properties of the words. At shorter segments, it's almost impossible. And then they had some frequency modulation. Completely not understandable. Completely not understandable. Again. and again. Okay. So by comparing longer and shorter segments, what they found is that, right. So you kind of have this effect where in your primary cortex and your secondary auditory cortex, you have the same response regardless of the duration of the segment. In your STS, the signal response increases as the length of the segment increases. So from this, he concluded that this area here is tuned on the temporal property of the sound. Okay. So this was the segmented speech. And then he had all the controls. So the modulation control stimuli that I just showed you, right? No modulation, no recognizable speech. In STS, dog barking, a little bit, and the noise vocoder speech. Now this, you see, this one where you could still see the modulation in STS, right? So this is the modulation, low response for shorter segments, high response for longer segments, is exactly this. I heard Spiel, viele, Menschen, and something like this, right? Do you also capture some words? But you could tell that there are words in there, right? This feeling that you had that told you that there are real words in there is exactly, at least according to them, your STS, meaning to successfully process and respond to this thing and recognize it as speech, okay? So the cool thing about this experiment is that even using the voice encoded speech with longer segments, you would get this activation here. Using this, no activation. Okay. So yeah, so their conclusion is that yes, we have this nice area in the brain, STS, which is tuned to temporal properties of speech. Okay. And if you wanna listen to this again, go to the video. Okay. Right. So here's where we were last time.
Can I ask a question about this? Just very quick.
Please do. Please do.
So I don't speak a word of German, but do they predict that my STS wouldn't be getting activated by recognizable words, or do we know anything about, you know, people who don't speak the language? Or
sure. So you missed the part where I said that these are actually English subjects. So they decided, so they decided to use German for English subjects because they wanted to get rid of lexical activation, basically. So in the previous study, they were studying when you have intelligible speech, when you would recognize the word, right? Here, they wanted to get rid of that and only investigate what they define temporal properties of speech, which is some sort of, you know, some sort of variation in frequency and amplitude that matches basically the phonological domain, right? Without intonation and without lexical access.
I see. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So that's what they claim that this area was active for bilaterally. So when you have lexical access, then you have your superiority of your left hemisphere popping up. This was the big result of Scott. When you don't have lexical access, usually you find bilateral activation. Okay. All right. Are there any other questions, or can we move on? Anyone? Okay. So.
Sorry, can I ask one question?
Oh, please.
Just for Just for clarification, when we talk about temporal structure, temporal refers to time, right? It doesn't refer to like the temporal lobe.
Yep.
Because we're talking about both meanings of temporal.
Yeah.
It's a little bit confusing.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, yeah. Yes.
Okay.
I mean, it's a kind of, you know, not very precise definition, right? So if you talk about phonologists, they would tell you, what the hell are you talking about? What is the temporal properties of sound? So it's something at the lower level of speech analysis, which is really, you know, the modulation of those frequencies, which you would recognize as classes of consonants, for instance, right? And as like for instance, combination of sounds that give rise to syllables, but without intonation and without pitch, right? So no vowels, no pitch, no intonation, but this kind of feeling that you hear some sounds that sounds like speech, okay? Right. And in fact, last time we finished by discussing about these problems about this experiment, which are, you know, some critics or at least some questions that come out of this experiment. Like, for instance, what is STS processing, right? What is the superior temporal sulcus processing? Is this syllables? Is this acoustic statistics? Is this words, phonemes, or all the things above? We don't know. You have to do more fine-grained experiments to figure this out, right? And we also said that, you know, for linguists, these results are quite trivial. It's not really surprising for us that there are some areas of the brain that process speech, right? But, you know, neuroscientists are skeptical, so it was really good to show that this specific area is particularly tuned to this temporal spectral property of speech, okay? Good. So, yeah, so let me tell you something about how we can think about neuroscience concepts, linguistic theory, and how we can build bridges between these two domains, okay? And yeah, last time we said, you know, we can just start drawing arrows and say phonemes are processed in certain cortical networks, which are functionally specialized for that processing, which cause brain activation when you're stimulated with this kind of representations. Same for syntax. So your building blocks of syntax would be constituents, phrase structures, syntactic operation dependencies, and we might look into our brain and look for areas which are specialized to processing of these representations. Same for semantics and same for pragmatics, okay? Now, is this the best way to understand how language works? Probably if you talk to some neuroscientist, there's a very high chance that he would tell you, look, I know you are linguistic theorists, but I don't really care, because most of the things that you assume, I'm not even sure they exist. They're not very psychologically plausible, right? That's what a neuroscientist would tell you. And then it's your job to convince this guy about the existence of these phenomena in our mind, and the fact that if they exist, something must be responsible for that, okay? What is responsible for that is an open question. Right, so if this isn't the best way to understand how language works, what are we doing here, right? And let me introduce you the skeptical monkey, the skeptical dog, Obama. I think at the time Obama was kind of skeptical as well, and the skeptical hippo, which is my favorite skeptical animal, okay? So, right. So we are in troubles. We don't really know how to build bridges between theory and neuroscience, between linguistic theory and assumptions about the anatomy of the brain and the functioning of the brain and the functioning of different networks. Who's going to help you? Well, you know, you can choose whoever you want, but I like to bring into the discussion these two guys here, Noam Chomsky and David Marr, okay? You know about Noam Chomsky probably already. You might not know who David Marr is. So Today I'm going to tell you, and this is very important, very, very important. Even neuroscientists, even the most skeptical neuroscientists, in a way appreciate David Marr and what I'm going to tell you about him today. All right. So you might have heard that at some point in the 50s, 60s, there was this kind of thing coming out called cognitive revolution, the birth of cognitive science, okay, as we know it today. And this is quite relevant for the relationship between neuroscience and linguistic theory, because this guy here, Chomsky, basically, he defined linguistics as a branch of cognitive sciences, okay? So not just some sort of domain of theoretical studies or language studies that has not, to which the scientific method cannot be applied. He said, no, linguistics is a branch of science. You can apply scientific method to that, to study that, okay? And in relation to this, David Marr claimed a very, very influential paper that information processing systems at any level of our cognition must be understood at 3 levels of analysis. In every domain of our cognition. So whether you're talking about language or vision or sounds processing, it's always useful to have these 3 levels in mind, okay? And these levels are the following. And this is something you should really learn by heart. One is the computational level, which is about what the system does and why. The other is the algorithmic level, which is about how the system performs its computation. And the third one, the lowest level, is the implementation level, which is how exactly this information is realized in brain structures and brain activity, okay? And for every phenomenon you can study, you can sort of frame it down within these 3 different levels. Can this help? Yes, they always help. So let me give you some examples. So first of all, this is already useful to bridge some connections between linguistics and neuroscience. For instance, you might say linguistic theory in general is something that is really related to the computational level, right? It tells us what the system does. What is semantics? What is syntax? What is phonology? Phonology is the processing of sounds and phonological elements in order to build words. Syntax is creating structures where you embed these words in, and semantics is assigning an interpretation to this structure, okay? And then you can say, yeah, and neuroscience is really about the implementational level, because that's about how certain parts of the brain work. And in between, at the algorithmic level, these 2 domains, in a way, come to interact. So the algorithmic level, what you're really interested in is like what kind of representations are created in your brain, right? What is the mapping between linguistic representation and brain representation, if there is anything, if there is any, and what operations and what processes are affecting this representation, okay? So let's talk about, for instance, you have certain words, you have a phonological representation of these words, and then you want to know how to combine these words together, and then you might have some phenomena like co-articulation or stuff like this. So you take these words separately, you apply these operations to merge them together, and then you have your co-articulated sentence representation, okay? Or you can apply, for instance, you can raise the pitch or modify the intonation contour of your speech stream, right? And then you apply this operation of modifying the intonation onto the phonological representations. Or syntactic movement. It is an operation which affects the order in which constituents appear in the structure, and so on and so forth, okay? All right, so yeah, so these processes operate on representations, and that's all of this is sort of thought of at the algorithmic level. But then the skeptical hippo comes again and tells you, all right, but like, are you sure things are really going this way? What's the evidence for this? Right. So first of all, I just want to tell you that the concept of representation introduced by Marr is really, really, really symbolic in a way. So what Marr said is that, for instance, you have certain representation. A representation is a formal system for making explicit certain entities or certain types of information together with a specification of how the system does this. So it's basically a repertoire of objects with some information that tell you about the rules of how to deal with these objects, okay? So the phrase formal scheme or formal scheme is critical to the definition, but the reader should not be frightened by it, okay? The reason is that we are dealing with information processing machines, and the way such machine works is by using symbols, so stand for things, to represent things in our terminology. So something that is a formal scheme means that it is a set of symbols which rules for putting them together, okay? Now, this kind of conceptualizing things was rather extreme. Now, many neuroscientists would not say that our representations are actually symbolic, at least to a certain extent. Our phonological representation, there is a lot of debate on whether it's symbolic or not, okay? Also depends on what we mean by symbolic. When you go to vision, right? His way of understanding these things is that even within vision, so he was mainly interested in vision, for instance, and his way of understanding this thing would be that even in vision, you are applying some sort of formal schemes in order to create object out of your visual field, okay? But you don't have to buy this assumption. There is a more neutral concept of representation, which is just the way our mind captures certain features of the external stimulation, and out of those features creates an internal representation of something that there is outside, okay? So in these terms, a representation could just be a sort of a statistical pattern of activation which is due to external stimulation, okay? So as soon as you move, for instance, one step above the one neuron which just records your external stimulation, you have one level of abstraction, right? And you are applying one level of abstraction to your very low level representation in order to build a higher level representation. But even the lowest level of the representation, even if you had a sound recorder in your cortex, would record the sound in a very, very loyal way to how the sound was perceived, that would still be a representation because it is represented in your brain. It is basically, it's like when you write down something, or where you take a picture, or when you write, when you make a painting out of something that you see, your painting is a representation of what you painted, okay? And then the issue of whether that is symbolic or not, then that's a more complex issue. All right, so let's assume for once that Marr is right, okay? And let's say the representations are formal systems, and then there is a formal scheme that tells you how to use these symbols to represent things, and then some rules that specify how the scheme works. So
sorry, Daniel, I think
please.
there is a question from Maria, and this is kind
Oh, sorry, I
a really interesting question. So it's in the
didn't
chat.
pop up. So, oh, in the chat?
Yeah.
Ah, thanks for letting me know. Sorry, I didn't even open my chat because it goes automatically where sorry about this. Zoom view show chat. Okay. So thanks, Alice. Thanks, Maria. Sorry to interrupt, but we are talking about mental representations. And does it have to do with frame semantics as well? Oh, that's the big question. So I assume that your microphone doesn't work, right, Maria?
No, it's working. I didn't
Oh,
want to
great.
interrupt.
Oh, please, guys, don't worry. Interrupt me, shout, make some noise. It's no problem at all. Okay, so yeah, thanks for the question. Can I ask you, what do you mean by frame semantics?
If I'm not mistaken, because that's what I've been doing in my cognitive linguistics class, generally the notions of prototypical stuff and schema representations and frames that are activated by some words or some constructions and stuff.
Mhm.
Yes, I was just
Right.
thinking if they're related to what we're
Yes.
talking, or if we're talking more in more general terms about representations.
Yeah. So very good question, right? So, at one level, I would tell you, yes, that's exactly what it is about, right? Because there are no schemas in the real world. We build up the schemas, right? And the way we build our schemas is the way we organize our external perception. So you see certain unrelated things, and then you relate them together and you build up some relationship between them, for instance, in your frame semantics, right? So your frame representation would be exactly one kind of abstract representation, which has one level of abstraction above the basic meaning, for instance, of a single word, right? But then one guy called Gibson, non-Ted Gibson, another Gibson, who invented the ecology theory of perception, would tell you that this is not a great way to represent these things, because in fact, your external world already includes a lot of information about the organization of objects. So his example was about the apple, right? It is not true that when you see an apple, you have to reconstruct mentally all the properties of the apple in order to understand, to build up the concept of the apple in your brain and to recognize the object. All those information is already there. All your stimulus is already organized. You just have to, in a way, capture that information, capture those invariants, and then your apple will just pop up in your mind ecologically. You just have to match the information that is included in your stimulation in your mind. So you don't have to build it yourself, basically, okay? So you would say something like the apple already contains these afferences. So for instance, the apple is telling you, eat me. It's in the visual stimulation of the apple, the information about eat me, right? Now, what I would say is that both guys are right, okay? Both Gibson and Marr, in a way, are right to some extent. So it is true that you have to reconstruct certain things, and it is true that a lot of information is already present in your simulation, right? But still, the moment in which your concept of apple or your frame of eating an apple pops up in your mind, you activated a representation of the apple in your mind, because you are not gonna like internalize physically the apple in your mind, right? You're not gonna inglobate the apple in your mind, at least until you eat it, right? So just by the mere fact that you are somehow recording certain sensorial features of the apple and just, popping up some activation pattern in your brains, that is already a representation of the apple, okay? And then we can discuss about what feature this representation has, whether it is symbolic, whether it's a schema, right? Or whether it is just statistical data popping out in our statistical analyzer. Is this clear?
Yes, thank you.
Maria, did this address your question? Okay. So some psychologists or neuroscientists, they would tell you representation don't exist. I think this indexes a fundamental misconception of the word representation, okay? At the most basic level, the only thing that the concept of representation tells you is that you are representing or presenting again or presenting in a different format something that was external to you or something that you were accessing to by your senses, okay? So at this low level, anything that we perceive, anything we are aware of is a representation, okay? Even if it doesn't have the feature that we just talked about. Okay. Other questions? Or can I continue? Okay. So now we're going to talk about these kind of things. And one of the advantage of representing stuff in the way that Marr talked about is that we can compress information, okay? So by representing stuff, if we have this formal scheme to encode information, then at the end of the day, our representation will be much lighter than a non-formal representation, right? And the other important feature is that it allows for abstraction and generalization. So when you conceptualize an apple, then you can say, yeah, this apple is big, it's small, it's probably going to be expensive, it's probably mature, I can eat it, it's not rotten, it's not dangerous. This suggests to you that we are not the only guys around to have these representations. Even animals, even insects, to some extent, when they make a choice about what to eat and what they not to eat, it is because they did some computation about judging whether what they perceive is good or not for them, okay? So in a way, you can also think about representation at the bacterial level, all right? Or at the robot level. Right, but then, of course, things are different with respect to the way we generalize and abstract over representation and the way an ant would do that, right? Okay, so again, is this real? Do we use representation as formal schemes or not? Right? Could have it been otherwise? That's what skeptical hippos always say. Why does it have to be like this? Why cannot we just exploit the network in our brain to capture recurrent patterns and invariants out of our external simulation, okay? And we don't really know for a lot of things, but we have some good ideas for a few things, right? Like, for instance, certain representation that we use for speaking. So, first of all, let me point out this very important thing. If you buy David Marr, then you have to keep in mind that there is always a trade-off between those certain information, those certain features of your represented object that you want to make explicit in your representation, at the expenses of information that is pushed in the background, okay? So I don't know if you're familiar with the photography, right? You might know that there are some format like JPEG, which compresses a lot of features of the picture. Or for instance, your MP3. If you compare an MP3 to a high quality audio, right? You might not even realize that the MP3 limits certain kind of information. But if you listen to the MP3 in some very, very good speakers and you compare it to a high quality audio, then you realize that certain features of the information are not present in the MP3. They're completely discarded, completely ignored. And those who are present, they are compressed so that the MP3 can occupy smaller space compared to the real sound. And same holds for JPEG versus RAW format. And same holds for taking picture compared to having me draw a picture for you, which would be a horrible result, okay? So, these are all very, very useful notions, as well as maybe effortful to recover certain information. Like, for instance, when you're zipping files and then you have to unzip them, when you unzip them, you have to spend time, right? Right. Another problem is competition. So if you have a representation, it might be the case that there is not only one algorithm that processes this representation, but more than one. And then what you also need is some selection mechanism that tells you which algorithm should process that representation and which algorithm should stay silent, okay? And the choice of the algorithm is very important, and it may depend on the hardware. So if you, let's say, if you have a part of our brain which decides which algorithms to apply to an acoustic representation, if you apply the right algorithm, you would get your sentence. If you apply the wrong algorithm, you would get a dog barking or stuff like this, right? So how do we know that any of this is true, right? How do we know that our brain has to make so many choices when just perceiving things? How do we know? Well, we know that, for instance, from one very, very simple phenomenon. So that tells us that our brain might not always make the optimal choice about the algorithm that it's using in order to reconstruct a representation.
Mm.
And when it does not make the right choice, you get fancy things. If you don't believe me, I'm here to convince you. So for those who have seen these pictures already, don't say anything, okay? Is any one of you who has never seen these pictures, even from the slides or anywhere? Please raise your hand. Okay, good. So you guys who've never seen this picture, please answer. So which face is a male and which is a female?
You want us to answer in the chat or here?
As you prefer.
I would say the left female, right male, but
Right.
I'm guessing that's the opposite, seeing as you're doing it.
Well, to me,
Yeah,
they both seem male, actually.
Right.
I would say so the face on the left female and the
Yeah.
face on the right male, but I could also say that they are both female.
Right. It's
For
really,
me, they are both female as well.
right. It's really nice because no one of you has said that these are the same pictures, right? In fact, they are. This is exactly the same picture. The one on the right is just a little bit darker. That's it. They're exactly the same picture. So if you change the contrast of a picture, a nice face like this could give crazy effects, right? Like for instance, appearing a female or a male. All right. Now this is, Torre di Pisa. And this is quite easy question, right? Which one is more sloping, the one on the left or the one on the right?
Well, now there is obvious that they're just exactly the same pictures.
Yeah, it's just like the perspective of the
Yeah.
picture that
Right.
changes.
But you see that the right looks like it's more sloping, right?
Yeah, it does, but then
Yeah.
we know that it's not.
We know, right. So don't think about too much what you know, but just try to listen to your feelings, right? So I'm gonna try to show you that they are exactly the same just by covering this, right? Just comparing two pictures, one on the left and one on the right, you have this strange phenomenon. Okay. Yeah.
Cool.
Let's move on. Do you see a woman?
Yeah.
You see,
Yes.
This is the face, this is the arm, and this is the knee, right? So this is called masking or disguise or whatever you want. It took a while to see that, right? But after you saw that, then you can never unsee it, right?
Yeah,
Right.
but I think that if you didn't ask, do you see a woman, we wouldn't be able to see it.
Right.
But you pointed out that there is supposed to be a woman.
Exactly. But after I told you, and after you see that, it's quite, it's quite visible, right? Right. So your brain didn't tell you that there was a woman there. I had to tell you. Okay. This is very, very fancy. So which one is darker, A or B?
Well, it seems like it's A.
Right? But you know that they are the same. Right? So perceiving the whole picture and knowing that one is white and one is dark gray sort of tells your brain that it should process the B as lighter, but in fact it's not. But now you might be wondering, yeah, okay, whatever, right? But it's not that our brain really makes me see things that don't exist. It's just the knowledge about that affects my perception, right? Good point. But let's take another one. These cannot be the same. Come on. They are so different, right? The one above is so much darker than the one below. There's no way they are the same color. But they are. They're exactly the same color. Even like this, I see them a little bit different, but you really have to make this very, very, very tight. Okay, but still again, same, same objection. Ah, now they're really the same color. Which orange circle is bigger? The one on the left or the one on the right? They're the same. Exactly the same. All right. What do you see? There is like a lake, right?
It seems to be.
It's a boy leaning on a tree, but he's lying actually, right?
But he's lying. Yeah. Ta-da. Boom. But again, yeah, of course, I play a trick on you. It's like turning the picture. This does not show a lot. So let's start moving on things that really don't exist. Like, do you see the black dots? There are some white dots and some black dots, right? No, there are no black dots. There are only white dots. The black dots are in your head. There is nothing in this picture that resembles a black dot. Okay? These bodies are exactly of the same shade of gray. Although the one on the left appear white and one on the right appear black. Sometimes you see things and you think that they are actually things that are not, for instance, right? So these are not real cars, these are toy cars. Oh, this is my favorite. This is a real place in Italy, okay? So, is this guy going uphill or downhill? Or maybe neither of the two.
Uphill.
Uphill, right? There's no way this guy is going downhill. No way. Yet, if you put a little ball there, the ball is gonna start rolling uphill. So the ball is gonna start going towards Pergine. This is in Trentino, actually. It's near Rovereto. So you might say, okay, this is just perspective. But then if you go there, you would have exactly the same feeling. And you know why? Because people went there with measurement, with instruments, and they tried to measure what was going on because they really thought there was some crazy magnetic field attracting things uphill. There is no magnetic field. This is just downhill, right? It's just that both are downhill, and you get this very nice illusion that this is actually uphill. But it's so strong that people really believe there was some magic behind this. Oh, this is crazy. Are these lines horizontal? No way, right? There's no way these lines can be horizontal. But if you fixate one line with your finger, then you will start seeing that actually they are all horizontal, all of them, all of them. Okay. Even my computer is freaking out. All horizontal lines. So what does this tell us? Is that our brain can be tricked, can be deceived, and just by some patterns that are in the sensorial stimulation, the process of constructing, of building up a representation can go very wrong, okay? And whether you know this or not, it's always going to happen. Just like the fact that this picture keeps rotating in your mind, it does not really rotate in the picture because it's not a video, it's a picture. And this is your head now, okay? So I think it's a good time to take a break, and then we can come back later to this, okay? Like some 5 minutes break, and we can come back at 6, 8, 6:10-ish. Okay. Okay, I think we can start over. I mean, start again. So is there any question about what I showed you? So the idea is quite simple, right? That if we end up seeing things that don't exist, it means that in a way, everything that we see is a reconstruction of our brain, okay? So for instance, this glass here probably doesn't exist. It's only an hallucination of my brain. But then someone tell you, yeah, you know, it might be the case that this glass doesn't exist, but if you're thirsty, then you're going to drink. And if you drink, you would feel that actually some water is flowing into your body, and, you know, and things are going to be better for you. So it might be true that we live in an hallucinated world, right? But our guess about the existence of things and about their behavior is actually a very well-informed guess, okay? So in a way, yes, it is true that we are reconstructing an internal world, which is probably different from the one that is outside, but our brain does a very, very good job at doing this most of the time. And then sometimes it doesn't really do a good job, and then you get illusions or misrepresentation or misperception, okay? So the point, in the study of perception, these illusions were really taken seriously as to evidence for the fact that there is a lot of processing going on behind the curtain before getting to the phenomenon, to the perceptive phenomenon, okay? And according to Marr, you know, these steps of processing were sort of modular and symbolic. Now, whether this is true or not, it is definitely true that there is some reworking of our brain in order to make us perceive things. But when it comes to a glass or an apple, we have a very, very good bet, a very, very good bet that the apple exists in the outside world and that it exists in a very, very similar way to which we conceptualize them, okay? However, there are things that are not really like this. For instance, now we're going to talk about phonemes and phonetic sounds, okay? So again, we are kind of at the level of the representation here. And then we can think about the algorithms or the operation that modify these phonemes. Like for instance, or they operate with these phonemes and with phones. Like for instance, phonological or phonetic processing, phonological or phonetic recognition, you know, and the stuff we chatted about in the previous classes. So first of all, what are phonemes? Okay, they are phonetic representations in a Marrian way, meaning that they are sort of a compression of the information that is included in the phonetic in the phonetic sounds, right? But there is some generalization and categorization and abstraction going on. So, you know, you might be familiar with what phonemes are, but if you're not, I'm going to tell you right now, phonemes are things like t, d, a, m, n, r, and things like this, okay? And yeah, which are mapped roughly onto letters, but not always in a transparent way. If you're German, then the way you map letters into phoneme is quite transparent. If you are Italian, quite transparent. If you're English, you're not, right? There is no L in salmon, for instance, and things like this. So at the at the linguistic, psycholinguistic level, what phonemes are continuous. Sorry, what phonetic sounds are continuous, non-symbolic representations, and they are more numerous than phonological categories. So you map phonetic sounds onto phonological categories, okay? Phonemes are phonological categories. So the phonemes are the basic discrete symbolic unit of language. And there is a mapping along speech, continuous speech, or sounds, or phonetic sounds onto phonemes, okay? And we have seen that there is some parts of our brain, specifically in the superior temporal cortex, that do this job for us. Now, okay, so first of all, in languages, there are certain phonological representation which are overtly realized and some certain phonological representation which don't exist at all, okay? Or they don't matter for lexical discrimination. For instance, in Italian, e and e are kind of the same, right? But not in English. So when I pronounce a lot of words in English, I mispronounce them, right? And I have a lot of problem at saying, for instance, sheet versus shit, right? Or these kind of things. So another interesting thing is about the concept of minimal pairs, okay? So certain phonological categories for minimal pair, like p and p, p and b, t and d, m and n. Can you tell me why are these minimal pairs? Does anyone have an idea?
Because you change, when you change them, the meaning of the word can change, and it's the minimal thing you have to change in order to change the meaning of the word.
Right. But within phonemes, for instance, p and b would form a minimal pair, but p and t wouldn't.
Yeah, because they are like closer together. I don't know how to say.
Right. So, for instance, we can map phonemes onto different dimensions, right? And we categorize them in different categories. So, for instance, p and b I think they're called occlusive, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I think like the movement of your mouth or of the tongue is basically the same. But for example, when you do like a p, I don't know how it is called, but it doesn't it doesn't make any like vibration. But what the B concerns, in that case, it makes a vibration. But I don't know how it's called. Like,
yeah, I mean vocal cords, right, vibrate and make a sound.
Okay.
And in phonological terms, we call them voiced or unvoiced. Okay. So yeah, very good. So what's your name again? Sorry.
Federica.
Right. So what Federica said is that when you say p and b, if you look at your mouth, it does exactly the same thing. P, b, p, b. You use your lips to obstruct the air, the flow of the air out of your mouth, and then you release them, and then you have this onset, right? The one difference is that when you say b, 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 you are vibrating your chord. When you say p, you don't, right? However, if you say pa and ba, you vibrate your chord when you say a, right? So even when you say pa, at some point you start vibrating your chords. Okay. So phonological minimal pairs are phonemes that are different for one feature, right? So this would be voiced or unvoiced. And the interesting thing is this. So first of all, again, we talk about when we talk about phonetic categories, right? We can have a very fine-grained discrimination. But when we talk about phonological categories, it's like a 0-1 difference. So it's either p or b. They are discrete and they are combined into lexical forms. And there is no fine-grained discrimination, okay? Now, psychologists and neuroscientists are very, very skeptical, just like the skeptical hippo. And they would not believe this. So people had to run experiments to show this, right? And they're called category discrimination experiments and stuff like this. Now, another important thing is that if you apply a rule to some phonemes, this rule is going to apply equally to all the members of the phonological category. It's like an all or none property, right? For instance, in cat, you have k, a, and t. So it's very, very easy to represent the information stored in the word cat, because you have just to represent the features that are represented in the phonemes, okay? So K is consonant and is, I don't know exactly what's the name for this feature, but you basically use the posterior part of your tongue against the upper part of your mouth. All right. So yeah, so you see there are a lot of differences between phonetics categories and phonological categories, or phonetics, phonetic sounds and phonemes, right? Phonetics are continuous and gradient, they're physical, they're general. Phonological sounds, phonological representations, they're discrete, symbolic, categorical, and they represent some level of abstraction over all these different features that can vary in the sound, and they're language specific, okay? Right. So how can we study these kind of things, and how can we study where these things are processed in the brain, if they are? Can we find some evidence that our brain is sensitive to the difference between different phonological categories, abstracting away from their specific fine-grained features in the frequency and in the energy of the sound? Okay, this was the question. So in order to do this, a very useful methodology is categorical perception. So categorical perception is when speakers are asked to identify speech sounds from a continuum that shows monotonic acoustic variation. So you are varying one feature, one single feature of a sound, but still at some point you perceive it as one phoneme, and then when you cross a certain threshold, you perceive it in a different way, okay? Like this. Tell me what you hear.
Yeah. Yeah.
What do you hear?
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Ge.
The ga?
I hear like the.
The as drone?
Yeah.
Like da as daddy?
I hear there.
There.
Like,
okay.
Yeah.
But sounds like a D, right?
Yeah.
Okay, good, good. This is what I was interested in. Okay.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Good. Now you have to tell me if you still hear the same sound, okay? If you still hear D.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Still D or not? So raise your hand who hears a different sound, okay?
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
I have one hand, two hands.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Do you still hear da? Okay. Four hands.
I hear like a the.
All right. So it changed, right?
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Now it's ta.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Okay. Now it's ta, right?
Yeah.
Or te. Now tell me when you hear something different.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Aha, there you go. Okay, good. So now I can tell you what I'm doing, okay? Okay, so do you see my Ableton Live? Right. So all I did was to play these sounds that you can see in this thing here, right? So this is ta.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry, this is da, right? So this little thing here is the onset of basically the point at which you create the t, the consonant, right? And this is your vowel.
Yeah.
Now look what happens. Now we are inserting some silence or some kind of devoiced noise between the t and the a. You see? A little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
A little bit more.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
A little bit more again.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
And now it's a ta for me.
Yeah.
This is a ta.
Yeah.
This is a da.
Yeah.
Still a da.
Yeah.
Still a da.
Yeah. Yeah.
For me, this is the point of difference. Okay. So the idea is that by adding some silence, by delaying the onset of the vowel, which is called voice onset time, VOT, okay, by manipulating this fragment of silence or noise, we actually turn a D, where this is minimal, into a T, where this is like between, let's say, 20 and 40 milliseconds, okay? So just by adding some noise between T and A, we turn a T into a D, okay? Now,
is it in Pratt? This stuff.
I think that they probably did it in Pratt or with some sound synthesis thing. Okay.
Okay.
But I haven't done this. But what I can do for you, if you want, is to take something more natural, like this.
Billions and 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 billions and.
So this is Trump saying billions of times. Okay.
Billions and billions and billions and billions.
Now I'm just taking 1 billion. Okay. And I'm gonna put it here. I hope this is gonna work. I tried before, but that don't guarantee that it always works. All right. So now we do the same trick. Let's try. So this is the onset, see, of this is the onset of the billions, right? This is the B, and this is the E. Okay.
Billions.
My God, a little bit too loud. Sorry. Okay. And
billions and billions and billions.
Oh my God, I'm playing everything. Sorry. Okay.
Billions and billions.
Okay. Now I'm gonna try to do the same trick as this guy did. Okay.
Billions and.
Now I will try to take a little bit of noise. Why this is not working? I think it's crashing my computer. This is bad. This is bad. This is bad. Come on. Oh my God. Okay, it recovered. So now I'm gonna take this little noise and put it somewhere after the B. Like here. And let's see how it works. I'm gonna add some noise. You see? And now it should sound more like a P.
Billions and.
Did it work?
Can you repeat it?
Yeah.
Billions, billions, billions.
Sounds like billions to me a little bit, but let's try to make it stronger. So let's add more noise.
Billions.
More. Yeah, probably I left some voice.
Billions, billions.
So here there is a B probably.
Billions.
So maybe it's better to get rid of this. Let me see.
Billions, billions.
Yeah, might work. So anyways, you see how we manipulate this stuff, right?
Billions and billions and billions and billions and billions.
I mean, it still sounds a little bit like billions.
Billions and billions and billions and billions and.
Right. So I didn't really succeed in what I wanted to do, but you got the point, right? Good. So if you look at the original stimuli that these people used, here is actually much easier to see, right? So this is exactly the same wave. They're just substituting, they're just moving the onset of the vowel away, and they're just adding this, which is noise. Okay. Right. So, you know, you can try yourself and play with words and see that actually this works. Okay, so let me go back to the slide. Can you see the slides now? Good. Okay, so right. So the idea is to do exactly what I told you with you, right? So to show you a continuum of sounds varying from ta to da based just on the amount of noise that there is between the onset of the consonant and the one of the vowel. And then you sort of find your threshold, which is different among people, right? Which is your phonological threshold between T and D, okay? So, for instance, what people found is that there is a better discrimination of sounds between the same category than between different categories, sorry, than within category. So you're better at saying that one sound is different from another when you move from T to D than when you stay within D, okay? So just vary a little bit the onset time, but I'm still within your range of D, then you're gonna be worse at judging whether the sound was different, okay? So yeah, so you know, newborn are able to discriminate any phonetic difference. They can discriminate any small difference between phonetic sounds. But then, when you get to 6 months of life, in a time window which is more or less 2 weeks, you fixate your phonological categories based on the phonological exposition that you got in your language, okay? And this is interesting because this really happens in a very, very short time of window. So your brain gets tuned to the phonological contrast that appear in your language, and then you're done. And there is no way you can discriminate the A or the A if you speak Chinese or Japanese, for instance, where, for instance, fine-grained tonal differences between syllables are meaningful with respect to lexical discrimination. Okay, right. So humans can detect speech from sine waves, right? Non-monotonic perception is found in non-humans, right? But this stuff is independent from phonological categories. What we are really interested in is the discrimination of phonological categories, right? So we know that animals have phonetic representations, right? But we are interested in the phonological representation in humans. So the idea is that if you take a phonological category, a de, let's say, within the range of de, you're going to have a very hard time to discriminate finer differences between different de's, okay? And this is exactly what I show you. The voice onset time is the time from the release of the consonant and the onset of the glottal vibration following the vowel, okay? So P, for P, the voice offset time is larger than a certain amount. For B is much shorter, okay? And then you can vary this continuously. So the categorical perception, your perception of de or te is a non-monotonic identification function. What does it mean? It means that you continuously vary the voice of onset time, as I showed you. There is a certain amount of time where you're very undecided, for instance, between 20 and 30 milliseconds, just varying these 10 milliseconds different. You get undecided, and there you're going to have longer reaction times in your phonological discrimination. But when you go before this threshold or above this threshold, then your intuition is much clearer, okay? So here you perceive B, here you perceive P, and here you're kind of undecided. And in our little experiment, we saw that actually that happened. So there was at one time at which three people said, this is a T, and then within a few milliseconds, a lot of other people said, no, now I hear it, right? Okay, so Phillips et al. Considered that in previous fMRI studies, right, a lot of findings found that some parts of the superior planum temporale, which is basically your A2, right? You remember from the other experiment, your secondary auditory cortex, there is a lot of phonological processing, and STG as well, okay? Superior temporal gyrus. However, with ERP and MEG, they actually found in some studies that your auditory cortex has access to phonetic information, right? So information about the phonetic sounds. And the way they found this is by using a component, an ERP or MEG component called mismatch negativity or mismatch field, okay? What is it? I'm going to show you in a very second. It's very simple. So basically, in order to test this, you need an oddball paradigm, okay? Oddball paradigm is very, very famous in psychology for stimulus discrimination. And here's how it works. You show a lot of stimuli which are exactly the same. And then at some point, you have a deviant stimulus, which is called oddball, right? And then you have a lot of, again, stimulus of the old kind, and then one deviant stimulus. So when you get the deviant stimulus, you have this red wave, which, as you see, is different from the blue wave, which is a negativity in ERP or a change of field in MEG, right? So every time you discriminate the oddball, then something pops up in your brain, and that's the signal of discrimination, okay? So in order to have an oddball paradigm, you need a lot of stimuli that are the same, and then one oddball that pops out, right? So the average responses to the deviant stimuli show a characteristic response component, which is not observed in the average response to the standard stimuli, okay? So you can do this with any kind of phonetic contrast you want. You can use it with pure tone, with pitch, with intensity, and with the duration of the sound. You can manipulate all these different features. The important thing is that you have this many-to-one ratio. And the oddball is the one. That is your stimulus of interest, okay? So Phillips et al. Start noticing that it's unclear whether A1 has access to phonological categories, to phonemes. We know it does a lot of low-level sound processing, right? But we don't know whether it is sensitive to ba and ta. So what they did was to use exactly the same stimuli that I showed you. They are taken from this paper, okay? They took the same parameter and they varied within standard and within deviant contrast. So you have, again, this, this would be this, and then you have this, and then you have the third. See, from ta to da, okay? And this is 60 milliseconds. So when you get to about 30, you kind of hear a ta. Okay, is this clear? Good. So what I did was a pretest with the forced choice identification task, okay? So tell me if you hear a da or a ta. And for each subject, they found the perceptual boundary So the right little threshold that determines whether you hear a ba or a ta with respect to the voice onset time. And then they use this stimuli for the real experiment. So in the real experiment, they randomly sampled sounds from the perceptual experiments, like from the one that I showed you, right? And they use the oddball. So again, example. You see that sometimes there is a ta, right? I'm sort of creating an oddball paradigm. So again, you present a lot of stimuli which are exactly the same, and then you present a deviant stimulus. And if the deviant stimulus is perceived, then it means that discrimination occurred, okay? So yeah, so then they said, okay, we have our paradigm, we have our threshold. Now what we want to do is two experiments. One that is called phonological contrast, and the other one is called acoustic contrast. And here's the difference. So as you see, these little things here represent on the y-axis the amount of VOT, right? So this is a T, has a lot of VOT. This is a D, no VOT, okay? And then they have all this continuum in variation, right? And in the phonological contrast experiment, they had basically this presentation. So they would present a lot of stimuli which are below the perceptual boundary of the subject, and then one audible which is above the perceptive boundary, and then again a lot of stimuli below the perceptual boundary. Now the trick here is this, that the all part of the stimuli, they're always varying. So at the acoustic level, all of these stimuli are varying continuously, but at the phonological level, you get the oddball pattern, okay? Because all these different Ds, they have a different voice onset time, but they're all perceived as Ds, okay? And those Ts, they are the oddball. So this is the real representation of the sound that is perceived. Sorry, this is the real presentation of the sound acoustically, and this is sort of, you know, showing the perception, the phonological perception of the sound. Is this clear? Okay. Now, this was the phonological contrast experiment, right? So they expect that people perceive this T as T and this D as D. And they had to press a button when they would hear the oddball, okay? To make sure that they would actually perceive what they were supposed to. Acoustic contrast experiment. So yeah, sorry. In the phonological contrast, you have the many-to-one ratio with the phonological contrast. It is exactly preserved, okay? Now, right. So interestingly, even here, the acoustic difference within category was greater than between category. So there was more difference between this D here than this D here compared to this D here than this T here, right? Now, it doesn't look like that, but I'm just taking what they said in the paper, okay? Now, this is not relevant at this point. I mean, it is relevant, but the acoustic difference within category was greater. Okay, whatever. It does not really look so. I mean, you see the problem, right? So this D is as different from this T 24 milliseconds as it is from this, right? So yeah, whatever. So what they did in the acoustic contrast experiment, very simple. They just shifted everything by 20 milliseconds, okay? So they just increase the voice onset time of all the stimuli by 20 milliseconds. And what you get is that a lot of these, they basically become T's, right? So all these here, close to the threshold, if you add 20 milliseconds, they go above the threshold. And then you're going to find them as T's, right? So in the acoustic experiment, there is exactly the same acoustic difference, many to one, right? So the difference between these guys and these guys is exactly the same as these guys and these guys, relatively speaking. But now all these became T's. So at the phonological representation, you don't have the oddball anymore, because now you have a lot of T's and a lot of D's. Do you see this? Is this clear? You see the trick, right? Take these D's and T's with a lot of variation within their category, lower the bar, raise the VOT of everything, and now you're going to get a lot of T's. The same difference, the same acoustic difference between these T's and these, but the difference that all these T's now are above the threshold, so they're not these anymore. Good. So the phonological contrast was dramatically modified within the acoustic contrast experiment, right? And then they just measure the MEG field, and then in their nice phonological experiment, they would find your mismatch field, right? So the field when you answer oddball, 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 right? Both here at this electrode and here at this sensor, because it's an MEG. So a strong bipolar magnetic mismatch magnetic field in the phonological experiment. Now, what are we going to expect to happen in the acoustic experiment? If this field, if this difference is due to the phonological contrast, it should disappear. If this difference is due to the acoustic feature of the stimulus, then it should remain. But we strongly expect that it will disappear. And that's exactly what happened. So in the acoustic experiment, no mismatch magnetic field, and also, you know, the oddball ratio would also vary in the experiment. So there is a mismatch between what the people perceive. I mean, sorry, there is a same effect with respect to what the people perceive at the phonological discrimination and the neurophysiological effect that was associated with the discrimination, right? So the results, strong mismatch effect, mismatch magnetic field in a phonological experiment, no mismatch magnetic field in the acoustic experiment. Localization of the mismatch magnetic fields, primary auditory cortex. So this effect was popping up in the primary auditory cortex, not in the STG, not in the STS, not in your planum temporal, in your primary auditory cortex. Really cool. And I guess we will leave the discussion of this study to the next time, which is going to be tomorrow, I guess. No. When are we? Monday, right, good. So Monday we'll finish discussing this. We'll go through this maybe a little bit again, and then we will start neurosyntax, okay? So we'll move away from phonology and we start discussing about syntactic operations and how the brain processes syntax, okay? So that's enough for today. I'm gonna stay here a few more minutes if you want, if you have any question. And yeah, see you on Monday. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.